Welcome to Chats with the Chief. I'm John Jensen, Chief of Staff at the Veterans Health Administration, and this is the podcast where we make small talk about the largest integrated healthcare system in the country. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Norman Hooton. He is a VA pharmacist now, but you may have heard about his heroic efforts depicted in the movie Black Hawk Down. Enjoy the show. Dr. Hooton, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you being here and taking the time to be with us, as well as I just really look forward to hearing your story and you sharing your story, and it's a great story to tell. Maybe you could start with telling us a little bit about who you are, your family, where you come from, and those kind of things.
Well, thank you, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to come up and do this. It's the first time I've been to the VA headquarters, and it's amazing, so it's a great opportunity for me, and I really appreciate it. I am a native Texan, and about as native a Texan, I guess, as you can get. I mean, my family moved there in 1840s, right after the Alamo, and they've been in Central and West Texas ever since. So I grew up there, joined the Army right after high school, and kind of worked my way through the Army and ended up in a Special Forces unit. And from there, ended up in the counterterrorism side of the house and worked for Delta Force for about 15 years. I'm married. I have 4 children, 3 boys and a daughter, and joined the Army again in 1980, served a little over 20 years, got out and went to the Air Marshals, and then after a long tour with those guys, and then in the commercial side, ended up with the VA, and I've never been happier. It's a great place to be, and thrilled and honored to be serving veterans every day.
Well, thank you, and thank you for serving veterans, as well as thank you for your service and your family's service. And as you said, you have a long lineage you've created of those that are continuing to serve our country. So one of the things we like to do is to, kind of start with, just to kind of get things warmed up. We always call them rapid fire questions, but they actually don't wind up being rapid fire. So you can take as much time as you'd like to answer it, but just really to kind of get an idea of who you are and kind of what's important to you and how things look from your position today. So what book, TV show, movie, or anything that you're reading or writing would be interesting to us, the audience, or anyone else?
When you make mistakes, and they're costly mistakes, you tend to look back and really analyze those mistakes, and then learn from them. And so I like those kind of books and movies and stuff. So I guess my first choice of books would probably be the book called South, the illustrated version. It's recounts the 1914 Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition that was led by Sir Ernest Shackleton. And everything went wrong. Took them 3 years in the Antarctica to do it, and they didn't accomplish the mission, but they survived, and the story of their survival and what they did to survive and how they worked as a team and how they solved problems is probably one of the greatest leadership stories I've ever read. You can learn a lot from it and apply it to anything you do in life, whether you're a soldier, whether you're working in the VA, whether you're working in business. And I can find a way to apply some of the stuff I read in those books to everything I do in life. The other one that's very similar would be Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer, and it recounts the disaster on Mount Everest. I think it was 1996, where I think at that time it was the single deadliest day on Mount Everest. And it recounts again the stories of some very, very accomplished mountaineers, some of the best in the history of the world, and some of the mistakes they made. And when you're reading it, hindsight being 20/20, you can kind of see it going wrong, and you would wonder how people in those positions could make those decisions. But then you look at the drivers that were behind those decisions, and it gives you some very good lessons learned. And then I wouldn't count Black Hawk Down as one of my read lists, but right. It's very similar. You can look back and go, those guys made a lot of mistakes, me being one of them. How did that happen? And what can we learn from it? So I like the books where I can really learn something from not only the successes of other people, but oftentimes, more importantly, the mistakes they make.
If our audience hasn't read them, those are 3 great choices in my mind to read, specifically when you talk about leadership. I'm sure that this is something, and just having spoken to you earlier and in knowing your story, is there a lesson or a piece of advice that you kind of fall back on, something that always comes to your mind when you're in a challenging environment, or something that maybe that you share with others that would be important or relevant to our audience?
I do, and I've had the opportunity to raise 4 children, and you find yourself trying to give them the best advice that you can possibly give them along the way. And if I could give them one piece of advice, and only one, it would be to never, never, never quit at what you believe in doing. Because sooner or later we all find ourselves in a position to where we could fail, and maybe we will fail. But it's really not a failure unless you accept it as a failure. You can always get back up, find another way around it. I'm a prime example of that. I was a very unlikely guy to end up in Delta Force. I remember when I went, I was surrounded by a bunch of Vietnam vets because I was a relatively young soldier. And some of those guys had gone off to try it and didn't make it, and they were a lot better soldiers than I ever was. And I actually had guys tell me, "Oh, don't go to selection because Sergeant so-and-so didn't make it, or Captain so-and-so didn't make it, or and they're way better than all of us, so your chances of making it are very slim." And I went. I was very persistent every day. I wasn't the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, and certainly not the smartest, but I probably was the most persistent. And because of that persistence, I found a way to succeed. And that's been kind of the story of my life and everything I've done, whether it was business, whether it was my marriage, whether it was being a soldier, working in the VA. I'm telling you, it's never over till you say it's over.
How did your time from really joining the Army as an enlisted soldier in 1980 through to pharmacy school, how did all those things shape you to where you're at today, and what led you to the VA to start with?
Yeah, I really went in the Army. I'd gotten out of high school in Texas and had no plans of going to college. Nobody in my family had ever been to college. I didn't know anybody that had been to college, so it wasn't something that was on my radar screen. The Army was, or the military was, an approach that most young kids from small town America go to. I think you could probably say the same thing about young people in Nebraska, right? They come out, they're like, if they're not going to the University of Nebraska, they're going to go to the United States Army, the Marine Corps, or one of the other services. So I was no different. I think the thing that shaped me the most and has probably been the most meaningful part of my life was the people that I got to serve with. Right. I mean, because you're coming in out of West Texas and you don't get to see the world, in Brackettville, Texas, but I got to serve with people from all over the country in the military. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't hear from one of those people. And I don't miss that job of being in the military. I mean, I'm long past that, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss the men and women of the military that I worked with. It was a special bunch. So that interaction with people throughout my career has done the most to shape me of anything in my life, and hopefully allowed me to pass on great lessons of leadership and life to my children. So
we have a lot in common, for sure. We're both retired E8s. You after 20 years, and following that 20-year retirement, or 20-plus year retirement, you went to the Air Marshal Service. Then you worked in Amman, Jordan, for the Jordanian U.S. Special Forces Training Center. And then you went to pharmacy school.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? I mean, that's quite a departure from being an operator then to go into being, a pharmacy operator and a doctorate of pharmacy.
Yeah. I got to the point in my career about the 21-year mark, where I was going to have to give the Army what I call a lifetime commitment. So it means that if you stay any longer, there's nothing else in your life that's going to happen for you. And that was to become a sergeant major in Delta Force. And I was on the list to become a sergeant major, and I was thrilled about it because I'd done that since I was 18 or 19 years old. I'd been a soldier, and it was something that just at that point was a hand in a glove for me. In talking about it with my wife, she didn't feel the same way about it. And her experience with the Army was a lot different than mine.
Right.
As with all of Army spouses, probably the most heroic and unsung people in the world are men and women that are married to military people. And she was scared to death that I was going to be on one of these trips and not come home, and she had small children to raise by herself. So we talked about it as a family, and she decided that, we decided together that it would probably be best for me to get out and do something else. At the time, with my skill set, I could have gone to work as a security guard somewhere, or, there wasn't a lot of jobs open for machine gunners and stuff in the civilian world. But she was a pharmacist, and she said, "Hey, why don't you consider going to pharmacy school, and we'll open up a small town pharmacy together." And scared me to death, because that was something so far removed from anything I'd ever experienced in my life. I didn't even know how to work an algebra problem. I had the very basic high school education that had no college. And she said, "Well, you know what?" She goes, "We're going to work on that." So she sat down with me, and I worked my first algebra problem. I was 40 years old. And she walked me through my prerequisites, and as luck would have it, I got accepted to pharmacy school and started at Campbell University in North Carolina in August of 2001. And a month later, when I was getting ready to sit down and take my first exam, 9/11 happened, and I was recalled because I was on terminal leave. So I got recalled back to the Army, and I was assigned as an Army guy to work with the Air Marshals and helping them ramp up their training program for because they were growing from like 50 people to 10,000 people. And
Wow.
they had to do that in a very short period of time. So the military helped them out with that. And I saw an overwhelming number of those soldiers who were addicted to opioids, and most of them as a result of injuries they'd received in their active duty career.
Right.
I saw a high number of overdoses, and some of those overdoses were very, very close friends of mine. And I saw the impact it had on their families and their life. And so I went back, I talked to Admiral Larson, who was kind of running the Kasodic project, and he was a mentor of mine, great submariner. He was a PACCOM commander for a long time. He said, "Hey, why don't you go back to pharmacy school? This time you know what you're going for, and try to make a difference." So they kept me on the payroll in his organization. I went back to pharmacy school at Palm Beach Atlantic in West Palm Beach, Florida. And it was there that I came in first contact with the VA. And up to that point, my impression of the VA was based on what I'd been told by a bunch of old soldiers that were Vietnam era soldiers.
Right.
And they said, "Stay as far away from it as you can get." It's terrible, terrible care. It's a big bureaucracy, and you'd be better off not being involved in it. And then I interned with the VA, and I walked away with a completely different impression. I think some of the finest men and women in healthcare are working for the VA.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of opportunities that we can improve upon, but nowhere in the world do they do what we do in the VA on the scale that we do it, and to the level of excellence that we do it.
Right.
And so I was very impressed with it. Decided to try to come into the VA and work in the substance abuse field with other providers. So, and was lucky enough to find my way into that role, and never regretted it.
Great answer.
But I was motivated by helping friends of mine, because I felt very blessed after I left the military. Everything was just perfect for me, and I couldn't understand why it wasn't for the guys that served on the same meter of ground that I served on. And it was heartbreaking to see some of the things that happened to them.
Well, you mentioned several things that are so very important. The continuance of giving more than you to care for others. That's why people get into healthcare, is to care for others. And in a way, military service is the similar thing, and that is you're doing it for others. You join the military to support and defend the United States of America. You mentioned COVID, and we've been in this fight for a long time, and it's kind of been a military process to get into this fight. But our hope is that through the vaccine that we can kind of find our way out of this and find a new way. So maybe you could talk to us about your thoughts about the vaccine, because we're running into a lot of, well, not a lot, we're running into some vaccine hesitancy amongst our veteran brothers and sisters. And so any thoughts about you and the vaccine?
When the COVID vaccine came out, I was, again, I'm probably like anybody else in the world. I don't like being told to do something. And I wasn't told to take the COVID vaccine, but after I thought about it, I thought, I'm in a position to where I'm going to be working around people every day, and I have older family members and stuff, and I felt like it was my responsibility to do it. I looked at the data that was available, and I calculated the risk, and I thought, of all the shots I've had, what is the chance that this one's going to be any worse than any of the other ones I've had, of hundreds? And and there was always benefit to the ones I took before. This is no different to me. And so I took the shot. I had the Pfizer vaccine, the series of 2. So it's not the worst one I've ever taken.
Right.
And as an Army guy, not even close to the worst one I've ever taken. So
Yeah.
so I just felt it was my duty to do it, and I've had no issues with it.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And as we continue to try and vaccinate our entire society, everybody speaking out about their own experiences with it, extremely important. And you're an amazing leader and have always been, and so leading from the front as usual. And we appreciate that, and we just ask that everybody continue to talk about it as often as we can to
The
understand.
other thing is, I really wanted everything to get back to normal. I loved
Exactly.
I loved what we had before the COVID, and I think the most direct route to normal is
Yeah.
is herd immunity and getting everybody vaccinated and putting it behind us so we can go back to being the way we were.
Ben, thanks for your comments on that and your thoughts on that. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Battle of Mogadishu, Somalia, almost 30 years ago, October 3rd and 4th, 1993. Just to tell you how old you are, I was actually in the field in Aschaffenburg, Germany, as a E4 when it happened, and we stopped night ops in order to follow what was going on there. So it was important. Our Army brothers and sisters were in harm's way, and so it's, I was in there, obviously not in the same thing, but I followed along with that from after that, and that's why it's always been important to me. And again, thank you so much for being here. It was not a good time, good battle. Things didn't go quite the way we had all hoped they do. If you could describe us a little bit about the mission and then kind of what happened, to share kind of the story, because I think everybody would be interested. It obviously was a book following that, I think in the late 90s, and then subsequently came the movie Black Hawk Down, where you were portrayed, which has to be really a unique experience to start with. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, Norm.
Yeah. So I was a brand new team leader in Delta Force at the time. I'd been there about 6 years at that point, and had been selected as a team leader, which was one of the most prestigious positions in the unit. So I was very, very, very proud to do it. I had great teammates. They were all experienced soldiers, and I was very blessed to be around them. And then, of course, our troop size element is basically a large platoon. So platoon plus, when you think of what they call a troop in Delta Force. And I was in Charlie Squadron so there were 3 squadrons, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. And Charlie were the new guys on the block. So A and B had been around quite a bit longer. When this particular tasking came down, nobody really wanted it because it wasn't seen as something that was going to be what I call a sexy mission. It was going to be basically, we're going to go sit over there in a hangar with a bunch of United Nations soldiers, and nothing's going to happen. And so they gave it to the new guys, the Charlie Squadron. And it started out as a one-team mission, and it just grew as we started to plan. It grew into not only a whole Delta Squadron, but a company of Rangers and their support elements too, and a company of helicopters from Task Force 160th. So it really grew. It grew legs. It started out being 4 or 5 men to almost 500 people when you consider the support assets that went with it. And we went over, got there, and we conducted probably 20 other missions prior to October 3rd. So we were there for several months prior to October 3rd, and we were conducting operations to disrupt his chain of command, his command and control element. And when I say his, I'm talking about Mohammed Adid. Mohammed Adid had actually left Somalia, and he was over in another country. But we were going to work on his command and control assets, so his key leadership and infrastructure. And we had gotten very, very confident in our ability to operate within Mogadishu. We knew where we could go, where we couldn't go. We knew when we could go there and when we couldn't. So we relied a lot on the timing of it. And this is kind of like when I talk about like Shackleton's expedition,
Right.
and like Into Thin Air. This is where I see the similarity is that you start to make decisions as a leader that are driven by other factors, and things you wouldn't normally do, you start to do, right? And you go, I could probably do that and get by with it. It wouldn't be something I would normally do, but I'm going to take a calculated risk, and I'm going to proceed. at some point those calculated risks add up, and they all added up on October 3rd. It was like what I call the perfect storm. You know, you
Right.
think about getting a helicopter shot down. Well, we got 5 helicopters shot down on October 3rd. There were 2 that everybody knows about, but there were others that crash landed at the airfield. As missions go, the first part of it, the initial, what I call the main effort, went very well. I mean, we were done in just a few minutes. It was the leaving part that got a little bit sticky, and that's fairly common in military operations. Getting in and doing it is not necessarily the hard part. It's getting away with it that's
Right.
the hard part. And there was what I call a lucky shot. It was the $1 million shot that took down a helicopter, and then it went from being a capture mission to, okay, now we've got a capture mission and a rescue operation. And while we were doing that, we had another helicopter shot down. Because as you start to invest into that crash site, you expose more people to gunfire. And so you're inflicting casualties and you're doing your job, but they're also inflicting casualties and damage on your personnel and equipment. And so we fought through it. I've never been more proud of American soldiers than I was that day. And anybody thinks that the greatest generation was great, but these guys and gals out there serving are also great. And what they did under the most demanding of circumstances was amazing. And I still look back on it and I'm in awe of what they were able to accomplish as a unit. Relationships, again, we talked about this a little earlier, but relationships are so important in everything you do. And about a year before that, I'd actually gone to Ranger School on a bet. I had a buddy of mine that had come from the Ranger Battalion. I'd never been in a Ranger Battalion, so we used to go back and forth about who was the toughest, whether it was a Green Beret or a Ranger. And he went to a Special Forces course, so he came back and goes, well, now I've done both, so it's on you. So I went to Ranger School, and while I was there, I got to meet a bunch of young Ranger privates and Ranger NCOs that were in the Ranger Battalion, but they were going through Ranger School. And as luck would have it, I ran into the same guys in Mogadishu. It was that company that was supporting us, or we were supporting each other. And so we trusted each other. And that element of trust allowed us to communicate better with each other and function. And I think it contributed to the survivability of both of those outfits, having those relationships. And still to this day, I talk to them all the time. You know, I just talked to one this morning. But it was a great experience. And again, the Battle of Mogadishu has kind of faded in memory, but the people that were there, I will never forget them.
It is quite a story, and it is depicted in a movie. And I'm sure that had to be very strange for you to have something that was so important in your life, I guess, to share the story, but also to have somebody play you. So what was that kind of like?
Yeah, that was, I don't remember exactly when the movie came out, but it was sometime after the Battle of Mogadishu. So I was still serving and had no exposure to the movie, contributed in no way, could not do it because, again, active duty military guy, you're not going to be involved in that.
Right.
But it was as much surprise to me when it came out as it was to it would have been anybody else. And that particular character in there is representative of a lot of people
Right.
On October 3rd. So it's not just me. I mean, I might have got my name tagged on it, but I could name 4 or 5 other people that were doing those things.
Tragic event, and it's it was impactful to all of us that were around at that time. And I know you've taken a lot out of that from leadership lessons, as well as the brotherhood and bond you have with those that you were there with. How does that shape your work today as a pharmacist in the VA?
It really has an impact on the way I see veterans. Because regardless of where our veterans served, they all have something in common that is only shared by less than 1% of the people that live in this country. So I think we're over 300 million people in this country now. Less than 1% of them have served. And regardless of why they joined or where they served or what they did, they all have one thing in common, and I use the words of Abraham Lincoln: they offered their life on the altar of freedom. Whether they even knew it or not, they did it. And that's something that Sometimes I'll get a difficult patient, and you just, you'll get frustrated, and then you stop for a second, take a deep breath, and go, wait a minute. He did something special. She did something special. She did something that somebody else didn't do, and so I'm going to make this experience as good for them as I can. And it may be that only time in their life where somebody treats them good, because some of our veterans, are challenged in a lot of ways. They're homeless, or they may have substance abuse issues, and that may be their time for somebody to really show them that they care, and then they'll leave your appointment and step back out into a world where they're not appreciated at all. So when I saw what happened to this, a lot of these guys that were in the Battle of Mogadishu were 18, 19-year-old kids. I was an experienced Delta Force commando and a team leader, but some of these guys were talking about what they did at their senior prom in the barracks. One of the guys I remember talked about how he'd never kissed a girl in his life, and then he died in combat. You think about it, and we have a whole population of veterans that we're just full of. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
One of the questions they asked me when I was applying for a residency at Orlando, one of the other residents asked me, said, if you could be any superhero that you wanted to be, which one would it be? And I said, I don't know. I'd just step out in the hallway and look in any direction, because you got them. They're there.
I love that.
And again, they come from all walks of life, and they served in every capacity. Some of them were commandos, some of them weren't. Some of them were cooks. Some of them did 2 years in the Army. Some did 20. But regardless of that, they all raised their hand, took an oath, and promised the country that they would do something if they were called to do it. That's pretty special.
Yeah, it is. And that's something that we can't ever forget. And I hope that our employees, our fellow employees that are watching this, can hear that passion in your voice and all of our passions, that every single veteran that we see and talk to or see on the street at one point raised their hand and said, I'm willing to.
They did.
Do whatever it takes for this country.
I'm offering you my life. And that is something that still gives me goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, me as well. Well, you're obviously a man of great values, and you've been through a lot and doing a lot, and I'm just so happy and honored to have you here. I'm honored to have you as a fellow employee, and for you to continue to serve. You served your country for so many years in so many different ways, and now serving veterans. And I'm just honored to have you here and honored to hear your story. And so I'll leave the floor open to you for any kind of closing thoughts or comments that you wanted to share with our audience.
I'm getting close to the end of my working career, so I'll be, walking away from the VA here in a few years, because and I'll be on a farm in South Georgia raising peanuts. But I can't think of a better way to finish out my life of service. Having served in the military, grew up with those guys and gals, and then being able to I can't run as fast as I used to, can't shoot as straight. We talked about how I can't see nearly as good.
Right.
But if I can check out and go to the farm, and the last thing I do is help a fellow veteran, that is to me, that's the perfect way to end it. I can't think of a way I could be more blessed. I was blessed to be able to serve in the finest military in the history of the world.
Amen.
Right?
Yep.
And with the finest men and women of our country, of their generation. And then to come back and then be able to serve those generations and the new ones. I see these new soldiers and service men and women coming back from the longest war in American history. And it's so inspiring to me. And it will be probably my greatest accomplishment, is being able to do that, and have a difference in their life.
Yeah. Well, I would say that you've made a difference in all our lives and sharing your story with us, but also in your service to our country, as well as your service to our veterans. Again, I'm very honored to have you here and to have you share your story. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. A huge thank you to all of you for listening, to Dr. Hooten and our broadcast team for their production support. Join us for our next episode, where we get a chance to chat with Dr. Chad Kessler, VHA's Emergency Medicine National Program Director. See you next time.